La Arrastrada con cadenas, pero un ranchero silencioso cambió su destino. The village itself seemed almost frozen in time, with narrow dirt roads, wooden houses, and a few scattered shops that sold basic necessities. Most of the people in the village lived simple lives, tending to their animals, working the fields, or doing small trades. But for Maria, life from the beginning was far from simple. Her family was poor, and her childhood was filled with struggles that no child should have to face. From a very young age, Maria learned what it meant to survive. Her parents worked long hours in the fields, and often she was left alone to care for her younger siblings. She would wake up early before the sun rose, to prepare simple meals and make sure the small home they lived in was as clean as possible. Even as a child, Maria had a sense of responsibility that was far beyond her years. She wanted to help her family, to make life a little easier for everyone, even if it meant sacrificing her own comfort. As she grew older, Maria noticed that the world around her was not always kind to girls like her. While her brothers were encouraged to play freely and go to school, she was expected to stay at home, help with chores, and dream quietly. Education was considered a luxury she could not afford, and dreams were often crushed before they even began. Despite this, Maria had a spark of curiosity. She loved to watch the horizon, imagining the places she might one day see. She would lie on the grass at night, looking up at the stars, and whisper wishes for a life that was different from the one she knew. Life, however, had a way of testing her spirit. When Maria was still a teenager, her family's situation worsened. The fields they relied on had poor harvests, and money became even scarcer. In her village, opportunities for girls were almost non-existent, and those who struggled were often taken advantage of by people who saw desperation as an opportunity. One fateful day, Maria's life changed forever. She was taken from her home by people who saw her youth and vulnerability as something to exploit. She did not understand fully at first. She only knew that she was being dragged away, her hands tied, her voice ignored. Maria was chained and moved from place to place, like a piece of property rather than a human being. The chains were heavy, and they left marks on her wrists and ankles, both physical and emotional. Every day was a battle to stay alive, to keep her hope alive, and to resist the despair that threatened to consume her. She faced long hours of forced labor, harsh words, and cold nights where she had nowhere safe to rest. Despite everything, Maria held onto a small flame of hope. She imagined a life where she could walk freely, where no chains would hold her, and where her spirit could soar again. During those long days, Maria observed the world around her carefully. She learned who could be trusted, even in small ways, and who posed danger. She noticed the routines of the people who controlled her life, the times they were kind, the times they were cruel, and the moments when she could find small pieces of freedom. Even in chains, Maria found ways to keep her mind and spirit active. She would sing softly to herself when she thought no one was listening, hum tunes from the village she remembered, and imagine herself running through open fields where no one could stop her. One of the hardest parts of her situation was the loneliness. While she was surrounded by people, she had no true friends, no one to confide in. Every conversation was monitored, every movement watched. The human contact she craved was replaced by fear, and every night she would lay down on the hard floor, exhausted and frightened, wishing for someone who could see her suffering and offer help. Despite this, Maria's resilience began to grow. She realized that even in the darkest moments, she could hold onto her inner strength. It was not easy, but the thought of freedom, of a better life, became the light she clung to. There were moments that tested her beyond belief. Harsh words, threats, and punishment were part of her daily life. Yet, even when she felt hopeless, Maria reminded herself of the small things she had once loved. The smell of fresh earth after rain, the warmth of the sun on her face, and the laughter of children playing in the village. These memories became her refuge, her reminder that life could be different, and that the chains she bore were not the end of her story. Maria also began to observe small acts of kindness in her environment, even from people who seemed indifferent at first. A neighbor who left extra food outside her door, a passerby who looked at her with pity but did nothing else, and other small gestures reminded her that not everyone in the world was cruel. These moments, though few, became her anchor. They kept her from giving in completely to despair, and they planted seeds of hope that one day someone might step forward to help her. Even in chains, Maria found ways to dream. She would imagine herself walking through forests, running across meadows, and laughing freely without fear. In her mind, she created a world where she could live without restrictions, where she could make choices, and where her heart could feel joy again. These daydreams became her lifeline. They reminded her that she was still human, still capable of feeling, loving, and being free. The first part of Maria's story is not just about suffering, it is about survival. It is about a young girl learning the harsh realities of life while holding onto a spark of hope. It is about resilience in the face of cruelty, courage in the face of fear, and the strength to imagine a life beyond the chains. Maria's early life was a test, a time that shaped her into someone who could endure unimaginable hardships and still dream of freedom. Her story in these first days and months sets the stage for something extraordinary. Maria may have been trapped in chains, but her spirit was not broken. She held on to the belief that life could be better, that there could be someone who would see her suffering and act. And in the silence of the nights beneath the cold sky, she promised herself that she would not give up, that she would keep hoping, and that one day her life could change forever. Days passed slowly for Maria, each one blending into the next like endless gray clouds. Life under the control of others had become routine, but it was a harsh routine, one that tested her body, mind, and spirit in ways she had never imagined. The chains that bound her were not only physical, but also a symbol of the restrictions that had been placed on her life. Every movement was monitored, every word she spoke was controlled, and every small desire she had was suppressed. Yet, despite all of this, Maria's mind refused to be fully captured. She spent her mornings performing the chores that were demanded of her. The work was exhausting, leaving her muscles aching and her skin bruised, but she completed each task with quiet determination. Maria had learned quickly that resistance was dangerous. The people who controlled her were cruel, and any sign of defiance could lead to punishment. So instead of fighting openly, she focused on surviving quietly. Each task completed, each day endured, became a small victory. She reminded herself that surviving meant keeping hope alive, and hope was the one thing no one could take from her. Even in the darkest moments, Maria found ways to keep her mind active. She observed everything around her carefully. The people who watched her had habits, patterns, and weaknesses that she noted silently. She memorized the sounds of footsteps, the timing of routines, and the way the guards or caretakers moved through the compound. These observations were not just acts of curiosity, they were survival tools. Maria understood that knowledge could be her strength, even when her body was restrained. At night, when the work was done, she would sit quietly in the corner of the small, dimly lit room where she was held. Her body was tired, but her mind was restless. She thought about the life she had left behind, the family she had lost contact with, and the village where she had once dreamed of freedom. These memories were bittersweet. They reminded her of what she had lost, but also fueled the tiny flame of hope that still burned inside her. Maria whispered to herself in these moments, telling herself that she would not be broken, that her story was not over, and that one day she would walk freely again. Isolation was one of the hardest challenges. Even though she was surrounded by people, Maria felt utterly alone. There was no one she could trust completely, no one who understood her pain or shared her fear. Loneliness pressed heavily on her, but it also forced her to become resilient. She learned to rely on herself, to find strength in her own thoughts and dreams. In a strange way, the isolation shaped her courage. It taught her that even when no one else was there, she could find ways to endure and survive. Over time, Maria began to notice small opportunities for small acts of freedom, however brief they might be. Perhaps it was a moment when the caretaker was distracted, allowing her to stretch her legs, or a quiet hour when no one was watching, giving her a chance to imagine a different life. Each of these moments became precious to her. They were reminders that life was not entirely controlled, that there were still small windows of choice, and that even tiny freedoms mattered. She held on to these glimpses as proof that one day true freedom could be hers. Maria's resilience grew not just from survival, but from the tiny sparks of hope she found around her. Occasionally, someone would show unexpected kindness, a piece of food left in secret, a soft word whispered from a distance, a small gesture that reminded her that compassion still existed in the world. These moments, although rare, were powerful. They reminded Maria that cruelty was not the only force in life, and that even in darkness there could be light. She began to cling to these small signs, letting them strengthen her determination to endure, to survive, and to dream of escape. As the days turned into weeks, Maria's understanding of the world around her deepened. She realized that her survival depended not just on physical endurance, but on patience, observation, and strategy. She began to anticipate patterns and recognize weaknesses in the people who controlled her. Each observation became part of a silent plan in her mind. She could not act openly, but she prepared herself mentally, imagining the day she might finally break free. Every detail she noted, every routine she memorized became a step toward that goal. Despite the hardships, Maria held onto her humanity. She would quietly care for small things, a stray animal that wandered near her place, a plant she nurtured in a small corner, or even a song she hummed softly to herself. These acts, though minor, allowed her to retain a sense of identity and hope. They were reminders that she was not entirely defined by her chains, that she could still feel, nurture, and dream. The human spirit, she realized, could survive even when the body was restrained. One day, while performing her tasks, Maria noticed someone watching her differently. He was quiet, calm, and not like the others who controlled her. His gaze was careful, observant, but not cruel. Maria felt a strange sense of curiosity mixed with cautious hope. She did not know his intentions, but something about him seemed different. He did not shout, demand, or punish. Instead, he observed silently, giving nothing away. For the first time in a long while, Maria felt the faint possibility that someone might be on her side. As the weeks passed, the quiet man continued to appear near her. He never approached directly, never spoke harshly, and never drew attention to her presence. Instead, he performed small, unnoticed acts of kindness. Sometimes he left extra food, other times he offered small items of clothing or blankets when the nights were cold. These gestures were subtle, but to Maria, they were monumental. They were proof that someone in the world cared enough to act quietly, without seeking recognition or reward. Maria began to understand that not all help came with noise or grand gestures. Sometimes it came in silence, in patience, and in careful planning. She observed him from a distance, learning to recognize his patterns, his quiet movements, and his methods of providing support without being seen. Slowly, she began to trust him, though cautiously. Trust had to be earned, and she was determined not to let her hopes be crushed again. Each small gift, each quiet act became a foundation on which her trust could grow. Throughout these difficult times, Maria's dreams never faded. She continued to imagine life beyond the chains, to picture herself walking freely through open fields, feeling the warmth of the sun without fear, and laughing without restraint. These visions were more than daydreams. They were lifelines. They reminded her that the world could be different, that life could be full of joy, and that she deserved a chance at happiness. The chains on her body could not bind her imagination, and in her mind she was already free. Part of Maria's strength came from remembering her own worth. Even when others treated her as less than human, she reminded herself of the qualities that made her unique: her kindness, her resilience, her curiosity, and her courage. She clung to these truths, refusing to let them be erased by fear or cruelty. This inner strength became her shield, protecting her spirit from being entirely broken. As the second part of Maria's story unfolds, it becomes clear that her survival is not simply about enduring hardship. It is about growing stronger through it. She learns to navigate a world filled with danger, to recognize kindness when it appears, and to hold on to hope when despair threatens to consume her. The quiet acts of the rancher, the small glimpses of freedom, and her own resilience all begin to shape a turning point in her life, one that will slowly lead her toward the possibility of escape and a new beginning. In the daily struggle, Maria discovers that courage is not always loud. Sometimes, it is the quiet determination to endure another day. Sometimes, it is the patience to observe and wait for the right moment. And sometimes, it is the ability to dream even when the world seems determined to crush those dreams. Her story is one of growing strength, of survival in the face of cruelty, and of the subtle ways in which hope can persist even in the darkest circumstances. Maria's life had been a cycle of pain, fear, and tiny sparks of hope for months. Yet as days turned into weeks, something began to change. The quiet rancher, whom she had only observed from a distance, became more than just a mysterious figure in her life. He was a presence that hinted at the possibility of freedom, a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, courage and kindness could exist. His name was Javier, though Maria only learned it much later. He was a man of few words, preferring silence over unnecessary speech, but his actions spoke louder than any words could. Javier had noticed Maria from the first day she arrived at the place where she was held. Unlike others, he did not see a burden, a commodity, or someone to control. He saw a young girl trapped by circumstances beyond her control. At first, he did nothing but watch, learning the routines of the people who controlled her. He observed the guards, their timing, and the strict rules that Maria had to follow. He understood that any sudden move could endanger not only Maria, but also himself. Patience, he realized, was the first step toward helping her. For Maria, noticing Javier was both confusing and comforting. At first, she was cautious, unsure of his intentions. People had caused her pain before, and trust was not something given freely. Yet, over time, she began to see a pattern in his behavior. He left small items in secret food, a piece of cloth to keep her warm, sometimes a simple note of encouragement written in rough handwriting. These gestures were small, almost invisible to anyone else, but to Maria, they were monumental. They reminded her that kindness still existed and that perhaps someone cared enough to act on it. The turning point began with small conversations. At first, they were simple and quiet, whispered in moments when no one else was around. Javier never forced his way into her life. He only offered small signs of support. He would ask about her health, about her strength, and sometimes about her dreams, listening carefully to her responses. Maria felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt seen. For the first time, she realized that someone acknowledged her humanity and cared about her beyond the tasks she was forced to perform. As the days went by, Maria and Javier developed a silent understanding. They communicated with gestures, with careful looks, and with subtle movements that only they could recognize. She learned to trust him slowly, one small act at a time. She watched him move around the compound, seeing how he carefully avoided drawing attention while still finding ways to help her. It was a delicate dance, one that required patience, intelligence, and courage from both of them. Maria realized that if this plan failed, the consequences could be dangerous, but her heart told her that this was her chance. One night, during a heavy rainstorm, Javier finally made his move. The rain masked sounds, and the guards were preoccupied with protecting their own space. He appeared quietly in Maria's room, offering a small handkerchief and a gentle smile. Maria's heart raced. She had prepared for this moment in her mind for months, imagining what it would feel like to finally leave the chains behind. Javier whispered instructions softly, telling her when and where to move, which paths were safe, and what to avoid. Every word was crucial. Every detail could mean the difference between freedom and recapture. The journey was not easy. The chains that had once held Maria were still present in her mind, a reminder of all the suffering she had endured. Her muscles were weak from months of confinement, and her heart pounded with fear and excitement all at once. Yet, every step forward was a victory. She held onto Javier's steady hand, trusting him completely. He guided her through narrow paths, over fences, and past watchful eyes, all the while maintaining a calm presence that reassured her. She realized that freedom required more than courage. It required patience, planning, and trust. As they moved, Maria reflected on her life and all that had brought her to this moment. The years of suffering, the chains, the loneliness, and the small acts of kindness all came together in a strange blend of fear and hope. She understood that her strength had been built gradually, through endurance, observation, and quiet resistance. She had survived not only because of physical resilience, but because she had never allowed her mind or spirit to be completely subdued. The image of open fields, sunlight on her face, and the feeling of running freely had carried her through every difficult day, and now it was becoming a reality. At one point, they encountered an obstacle, a locked gate and a guard patrolling nearby. Maria's heart raced, but Javier remained calm. He had planned for this moment. Using knowledge he had gathered over weeks of careful observation, he guided Maria through a hidden path, one that avoided the guard entirely. Every step required precision and focus. Maria had never moved so quietly in her life, but she trusted Javier's instructions completely. The sense of teamwork between them, unspoken yet profound, created a bond that went beyond words. As they finally emerged from the compound and into the open countryside, Maria felt a rush of emotions that she had never experienced before. Relief, joy, disbelief, and gratitude all mingled together in a way that was overwhelming. She looked at Javier, wanting to thank him, but words were not enough. He smiled quietly, acknowledging her feelings without needing to speak. In that moment, Maria realized that courage often comes in the form of quiet actions. Javier had risked everything to give her a chance, and she would never forget it. The journey to safety was still ongoing, but every step away from the place of her suffering strengthened her resolve. Maria felt the chains, not just on her wrists and ankles but in her mind, gradually dissolving. Each step forward was symbolic of a new beginning, a life where she could choose her path, make her own decisions, and dream freely. The wind on her face, the sound of leaves rustling, and the distant chirping of birds, all these simple things felt miraculous after months of confinement. During the escape, Javier spoke little, but his presence was constant. He knew that too many words could attract attention, so he relied on gestures and gentle guidance. Maria learned to read his signals, understanding when to pause, when to move, and when to hide. This silent communication was critical to their success. It taught Maria the importance of trust, patience, and awareness. She realized that freedom was not only a destination, but also a journey that required vigilance, courage, and careful planning. As the hours passed, Maria and Javier finally reached a safe location, a small, hidden shelter in the woods, far from the eyes of those who had kept her chained. Maria collapsed onto the ground, exhausted but exhilarated. The reality of her escape was sinking in. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she felt truly free. She could breathe deeply, stretch her limbs, and allow herself to rest without fear. Her body was tired, but her spirit soared. In that moment, Maria understood that freedom was not merely a physical state. It was a triumph of hope, courage, and perseverance. In the days that followed, Maria began to recover slowly, both physically and emotionally. The shelter became a place of healing, reflection, and planning for the future. She and Javier worked together to ensure her safety, taking careful steps to avoid being discovered. Maria's gratitude toward him was immense, but she also felt a growing sense of independence. She realized that her own resilience, intelligence, and courage had played an equally vital role in her escape. Freedom was a collaborative effort between her determination and Javier's careful guidance. Part 3 of Maria's story is the turning point, the moment when hope transforms into action. It shows that courage is not always loud or grandiose. Sometimes it is quiet, patient, and calculated. Javier's silent heroism, combined with Maria's resilience, intelligence, and determination, created a moment of profound change. It was a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, one person's courage can change the life of another, and that freedom often requires both preparation and trust. Maria's journey toward freedom was far from over, but the most difficult step, the first step out of chains, had been taken. She had learned that courage, hope, and careful planning could overcome fear and oppression. The turning point had arrived, and with it, a glimpse of a future where she could finally live on her own terms. This moment, filled with both relief and anticipation, marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one defined not by chains, but by choice, resilience, and the quiet power of a kind and courageous heart. After the escape, Maria's life changed in ways she had never imagined. The immediate fear of being caught slowly faded, replaced by a mix of relief, wonder, and the daunting reality of building a new life. Even though she was finally free from the chains that had bound her, the journey toward true safety and independence was only beginning. She had stepped into a world she had dreamed about for years, a world where choices and freedom were possible, but it was also a world she had to learn to navigate carefully. Maria spent the first few days recovering physically. Her body ached from months of confinement, and her muscles were weak from lack of movement. Sleep was deep but filled with dreams of fear and freedom, a reflection of the months she had endured. Every small movement reminded her of how much she had been restrained, but at the same time, every stretch, every step, and every breath reminded her that she was finally in control of her own body. She realized that freedom was not just a state of being, it was something she felt in every part of herself, from her heart to her toes. Javier remained a steady presence, but he never overshadowed her growth. He had been the one to guide her out of danger, to plan and protect, but now he encouraged Maria to take small steps on her own. He reminded her that she had survived not only because of his help, but because of her own courage, intelligence, and resilience. Slowly, Maria began to trust herself in ways she had never been able to before. She learned to make decisions, to move through the world with awareness, and to understand her own strength. Every choice she made, no matter how small, was a victory. The first challenge Maria faced was learning to navigate the outside world again. Months of confinement had left her unfamiliar with even the simplest things, like crossing a street safely, interacting with strangers, or managing small tasks without fear. Every step was a lesson in confidence. She observed people carefully, noticed their behaviors, and learned how to interact without drawing unnecessary attention. Javier guided her when needed but allowed her space to make mistakes and learn from them. Maria realized that freedom came with responsibility, and that the ability to live safely depended on both courage and wisdom. As days turned into weeks, Maria's emotional recovery became equally important. The months of fear, isolation, and abuse had left deep marks on her heart. There were moments when memories of her captivity returned with vivid intensity, making her feel vulnerable and anxious. However, she also learned to face those memories with courage. She spoke about her experiences with Javier, sometimes in quiet conversations late at night, and sometimes through small personal reflections she wrote down on scraps of paper. This process helped her release some of the heavy weight she had carried for so long. Maria also began to notice the power of hope in her life. She had survived terrible circumstances, and now she realized that life had possibilities she had never imagined. She could see the beauty in small things, the sunlight filtering through the trees, the sound of birds in the morning, the laughter of children playing nearby. These moments, though ordinary to many, were extraordinary to her. Each day she allowed herself to notice and appreciate the small joys around her, and each day her heart felt lighter, her spirit stronger. During this time, Maria and Javier continued to plan for her long-term safety. They discussed how she could reach a nearby town where she would be safe, how she could find work, and how she could eventually support herself independently. Javier never rushed her. He understood that recovery was a process, and that Maria needed time to regain both her physical strength and her confidence. Every step they took was measured, careful, and thoughtful, ensuring that Maria's freedom would be lasting and secure. One of the most profound lessons Maria learned during this period was the importance of trust. Trust had been scarce in her life before, and it had always been accompanied by fear. Now, she saw that trust could be a source of strength. By trusting Javier, she had survived the escape. By trusting herself, she began to rebuild her life. She understood that trust was not blind. It was measured, cautious, and intentional, but it was also necessary. It allowed her to open her heart to the possibility of friendship, safety, and new beginnings. Maria's first steps into the nearby town were filled with awe and nervousness. The town was bustling with people, sounds, and colors that she had almost forgotten existed. Simple things, shops filled with food, children running freely, and people greeting each other, seemed miraculous to her. Each step she took felt like a statement of her independence. For the first time, she walked without chains, without fear holding her back, and every breath felt like a celebration of life itself. Finding support in the town was a slow process. Maria had to learn whom she could trust, whom to approach for help, and how to assert herself without fear. She began with small steps, talking to a shopkeeper, seeking directions, and gradually building relationships with people who showed kindness. Every interaction, no matter how minor, helped her feel more connected to the world and less defined by the trauma of her past. She discovered that the world had more kindness than she had dared to imagine, and that small acts of care could restore her faith in humanity. One of the most transformative moments came when Maria realized she could help herself through work. Javier encouraged her to find simple tasks that would allow her to earn money and gain confidence. She began helping with household chores, working in local farms, and assisting in small shops. Each successful task, each day she earned her own living, reinforced her sense of independence. She no longer felt like a victim of circumstances. She was a young woman capable of surviving, contributing, and shaping her own destiny. During this time, Maria also reflected on her past, not to dwell in sorrow, but to recognize her strength. She thought about the months she had spent chained, the long days of suffering, and the courage it had taken to endure. She realized that those experiences, as painful as they were, had taught her resilience, patience, and awareness. They had prepared her for the freedom she now enjoyed. She understood that her past did not define her. It had strengthened her for the life she was beginning to build. Maria's relationship with Javier evolved during this time as well. Though he had guided her out of captivity, he now acted as a mentor and a steady presence in her life. He encouraged her independence, respected her decisions, and never imposed his own will on her. Their bond was built on mutual respect, trust, and shared understanding. Maria knew that she owed him her life, but she also recognized that the life she was building now depended on her own courage and wisdom. Javier had opened the door to freedom, but she was the one walking through it. As weeks turned into months, Maria began to dream more boldly. She imagined a life where she could learn, grow, and pursue her passions. She pictured a future where she could help others in similar situations, where she could be a voice for those who could not speak, and where her story could inspire hope. The chains of her past were gone, but they had left a mark that reminded her of the importance of courage, resilience, and compassion. She realized that her freedom was not only for herself, but could also be a beacon for others in need. Part 4 of Maria's story is about the aftermath of her escape, the period of reflection, recovery, and growth. It shows that freedom is not only about leaving a place of suffering, but also about building a life afterward. Maria learns that survival is just the first step. Healing, independence, and self-discovery are equally important. Her journey demonstrates that courage, hope, and careful planning can create lasting change, and that the support of others, combined with personal resilience, can transform a life forever. Maria had emerged from darkness into light, but the story was not yet complete. The lessons she learned during these months, trust, patience, courage, and self-reliance, prepared her for the final stage of her journey, a life fully lived on her own terms. The experience had changed her, strengthened her, and shown her the power of hope and human kindness. Her past had been harsh, but it had also shaped a young woman who could now face the future with confidence, gratitude, and determination. Maria's journey had taken her from darkness into a life filled with hope and new possibilities, but the final chapter of her story was about more than survival. It was about living fully, building a future, and turning her past into strength. After months of recovery, learning, and reflection, she began to see that freedom was not just an escape from chains. It was the beginning of a life she could shape with her own hands. Every step she took now was a statement of her independence, courage, and resilience. One of the first steps Maria took was to establish a safe home for herself. With the support of Javier and kind people she had met in the nearby town, she found a small, modest place where she could live without fear. It was not a grand home, but it was hers. The walls, the small furniture, and even the bare floors became symbols of her new life. Maria took pride in arranging the space herself, cleaning it, and making it a place where she could feel secure and at peace. This simple act of creating her own home was powerful. It was the first tangible proof that she was no longer a victim, but a young woman in control of her life. Work became another cornerstone of her new life. Maria had always dreamed of learning and contributing, and now she had the freedom to do both. She found small jobs in the town, helping people with chores, assisting in farms, and supporting shops. Each task, no matter how minor, strengthened her confidence and sense of independence. She discovered the satisfaction of earning her own living, making her own choices, and knowing that her efforts were directly tied to her survival and growth. Work was no longer a burden, it was a tool of empowerment. Education also became important to Maria. Though she had missed years of schooling, her curiosity and desire to learn were stronger than ever. She began attending classes offered by local community centers and reading books she could borrow from neighbors. Every page she read, every lesson she learned, felt like a step toward freedom in her mind. Knowledge became her shield and her power. She understood that learning was not just about gaining skills. It was about expanding her world, imagining possibilities, and ensuring that she would never again be trapped by ignorance or dependence. Maria's relationship with Javier evolved in this final stage of her journey as well. He had been her guide and protector, but now he became a trusted friend and mentor. He never imposed his will on her, never treated her as anything less than capable, and always respected her growing independence. Maria was grateful for his role in her escape, but she also realized that the life she was building now depended on her own courage and decisions. Their bond was one of mutual respect, trust, and admiration, a quiet friendship formed through shared experiences and the understanding of the strength it took to survive and thrive. One of the most powerful changes in Maria's life was her perspective on the past. She no longer saw her suffering as something that had destroyed her. Instead, she began to see it as something that had shaped her, strengthened her, and prepared her for the life she now led. The months of being chained, the fear, the loneliness, and even the small moments of kindness she had received were all part of the story that made her resilient. Maria realized that her past was a source of wisdom, a reminder of her courage, and a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure. As she rebuilt her life, Maria also felt a growing desire to help others. She knew that there were countless people like her, trapped, afraid, and in need of hope. While she could not undo their suffering, she could offer support, encouragement, and guidance. Maria began volunteering quietly in her community, helping girls and women who were vulnerable, sharing her story to inspire courage, and providing practical help to those in need. This act of giving back became a source of joy and purpose. It reminded her that her freedom was not only for herself, but could also be a beacon of hope for others. Social connections, which had been absent for so long, also became an important part of her life. Maria began forming friendships with people who respected and valued her. These relationships were built on trust, kindness, and shared experiences. She learned to laugh freely again, to share her thoughts, and to accept support without fear. The simple act of connecting with others, of feeling belonging, was a profound healing experience. Maria realized that human connection was as essential as physical freedom. It brought emotional strength, resilience, and joy. One of the most remarkable aspects of Maria's new life was her sense of self. She no longer defined herself by what had been done to her, but by what she could achieve, contribute, and experience. Every small victory, finding work, learning something new, helping someone, or simply enjoying a moment of peace, reinforced her identity as a strong, independent young woman. Maria discovered that freedom was not just the absence of chains, but the presence of self-confidence, choice, and purpose. She had transformed from a girl who had been silenced into a young woman whose voice and actions mattered. Maria also began to dream about the future in ways she never had before. She imagined traveling to places beyond her village, meeting people who shared her passion for helping others, and creating opportunities for herself that were once unimaginable. These dreams, once distant and impossible, now seemed achievable because she had the courage, skills, and determination to pursue them. Maria's story showed that hope was not just a feeling. It was a roadmap, a motivation, and a driving force that could guide her life in powerful ways. Throughout this period, Maria maintained a deep sense of gratitude for her own strength, for the kindness of Javier, and for the new opportunities life had presented. She knew that the journey had been difficult and that she had faced challenges many could not imagine, but she also understood that each challenge had prepared her for this moment. Gratitude became a daily practice, allowing her to focus on what she had gained rather than what she had lost. This perspective transformed her mindset, giving her clarity, peace, and motivation to continue building her life. As Maria's story reached this final stage, it became clear that freedom was not a single moment. It was a journey of continuous growth, learning, and healing. The chains that had once bound her body were gone, but the lessons they taught her, the resilience, courage, awareness, and hope, remained. She had learned that life could be cruel, but it could also be kind. She had learned that hope, even in the smallest form, could be a powerful force. And she had learned that one person's courage could change another's life forever. The ultimate message of Maria's journey was that transformation is possible, even after extreme hardship. She had moved from fear to freedom, from despair to hope, and from isolation to connection. Each step of her journey had been significant, from enduring her initial captivity to trusting Javier, escaping, recovering, and finally building a life of independence, purpose, and joy. Maria's story was a testament to the strength of the human spirit, the power of kindness, and the importance of never giving up on oneself, no matter how difficult life may seem. In the end, Maria stood as a young woman fully in control of her destiny. She had faced the worst, survived it, and emerged stronger, wiser, and braver than ever. Her life had been forever changed by those who had helped her, by her own courage, and by her unwavering hope. She continued to move forward, embracing each new day with gratitude and determination, and inspiring others through her actions and story. The chains of her past no longer defined her. Instead, they had become a part of the story that proved she could overcome, thrive, and create a life filled with freedom, purpose, and joy. Maria's journey, from captivity to freedom and from fear to self-discovery, became more than just her personal story. It became a symbol of hope. It showed that even in the darkest circumstances, courage, patience, and compassion could create life-changing opportunities. It reminded everyone that resilience, trust, and determination are powerful forces that can lead to lasting transformation. Her life was no longer about surviving. It was about living fully, helping others, and turning past pain into a future filled with possibilities.